All right. So good morning, everyone. Good morning, Adam. And everyone, this is Adam Greenfader, founder and CEO of AG&T Development, and also was chair of the Caribbean Council and Southeast Florida Council for the Urban Land Institute for the past 5 years. He's just told me that he's now no longer in that role. So I'm very, very humbled and grateful to have you here, Adam. We've known each other for quite some time now, and we've kind of, you've been following my journey, I've been following yours, and we started initially talking about and collaborating on resilience in the Caribbean. So I'm very excited to hear all of the advances, everything that's happened the past couple of years, and to talk a little bit more with you about this whole impact real estate, catalytic real estate, regenerative real estate. So I'll let you introduce yourself and speak a little bit more about yourself and the current projects that you're working on and the past background and experience. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure, Francis. And, thank you for having me. I know we've been having this conversation for many years and it's evolved, and it's just always a pleasure to, continue moving the ball forward. So as you had mentioned, my name is Adam Greenfader. I am the chairman of AG&T, and we are real estate developers and advisors. Most of our work is done in the Caribbean. We've worked on about 50 different projects over a 30-year period. It's hard to believe that many. I started as an affordable housing developer. So initially, about 15 projects we built for affordable housing in Puerto Rico. And to this day, we still have a handful of affordable housing projects that we own and manage on the island. So my initial kind of foray into what would be impact investing started with getting to know kind of how affordable housing works and how we support those people that really have great needs, both financial, social, and even in some of our projects we had psychologists to help the families be able to get through some of the tough times. And that was
Beautiful.
probably a unique hallmark of our initial developments, was that we included a social worker, psychologist on staff, and they're still there. And so it just kind of made me aware of that. As developers, we don't just build, the cement and the concrete and the walls, but we also build communities and families. And it really is about the combination of those two things that has got me kind of on this path to regenerative development, resiliency, and impact. So from affordable housing, we moved our operations about a decade ago to Miami. So we're based in Miami. And that really helped us expand from one island to about 10 different islands today. Where we're very active in Sint Maarten, Costa Rica. We're active in Jamaica, St. Croix, and the list just goes on. But we find that no matter what you call the island, they all have a lot of similar characteristics and needs and opportunities. So
Mhm.
today we tend to connect capital with development projects. Our specialty has been large scale master plan resorts and communities, and all with this kind of focus of resiliency and support for the local project and island.
Beautiful, beautiful, and such an important subject, specifically in the Caribbean. With regards to resiliency, that being like some of the most vulnerable places in the world. I know that's what got me down this rabbit hole early on in my career. It's like, how could I used to see all of these hurricanes devastating our islands, and having coming from Caribbean background myself, I said I have to get involved in something that is more building them in a more resilient manner. And that was the beginning of it. But then it's gone, down a number of different routes with sustainability and now regeneration. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And it's been impressive to follow your journey throughout. And I'm, very, very grateful for everything that you're doing. So with regards to impact real estate, so this is a conversation about there's a group of us, there's communities out there. We're really a global community of regenerators. It's getting bigger. I've witnessed the movement grow, and we want to live in these places. There's a lot of incredible humans that are looking for this type of product out there. And we find it very difficult for us to get funded. Aside from the fact that there's been also a lot of people getting into the development aspect of things that may not come from a development background, we're looking at impact real estate, catalytic real estate, essentially real estate that is a force for good. And so, what do you think of when you hear the term impact real estate, if you will, and what do you think of the term regenerative real estate? So, like, let's kind of see what the differences are for you, and maybe give it a little bit of a twist in this moment. Thank you.
So I guess my journey, in impact investing started with the 2017 hurricanes, Irma and Maria, that really
I remember those.
yeah, it destroyed Puerto Rico and a bunch of islands. And when I say destroyed, I mean, we're talking about thousands of lives
Mm-hmm.
lost,
Mm-hmm.
months and months without water and electricity, just absolute dismal conditions for people. And when I was, I lived through about 7 hurricanes myself, so I know what the pain is like. For Irma and Maria, I was in Florida when it happened, and we did get hit by a hurricane. It wasn't too bad. But our family on the islands, they were just struggling. So it became a very quickly a rescue and relief mission. And the first
Mm-hmm.
couple of weeks, it was let's get supplies and water down to the islands. Flights were not, you couldn't get people out. There were no commercial flights. So it
Mm-hmm.
really became about, uh, you know, getting people out, and then obviously building the energy back up, because without lights, you don't have water, you don't have sanitary. It was very, very, very,
And
very tough. So it became a
security also, when you look at the security aspect of it, because of all I remember I had people in Sint Maarten that their houses were getting ransacked because people had nowhere to go to eat and have shelter. So it gets to that extreme level of how are you going to be secure in your place here when you're at that when something like that happens. So
yeah.
sorry.
No, massive amounts of pain, and that leads to people not being happy, and then being desperate, and immigration, movement out of the islands in
Mm-hmm.
mass occurred all throughout the region, and so it just really made me aware that from an impact investing perspective, there's certain regions that if you do work in them, whatever you do is going to have a bigger impact. We just had a conference in Puerto Rico called Uncorrelated, where it was about impact investing. We had a lot of people speak on it, and I think that the overall message is that you can make a great impact and still make a profit. So
Mm-hmm.
impact investing is not some kind of you know pie in the sky concept. It's really about making an impact in the region you're in while you make a profit. So what we're seeing on impact investing, I guess my definition, or the definition that you hear most frequently, is that it's this: how do we help a region still bring resources and assets that don't exist, and still make a very good return. And so what we do see is in the Caribbean region, you have that great combination, right? You are able to go in, provide, whether it's capital or development or other services. And because it's a small region and there are a lot of barriers to entry, when you do get in and you are successful, you ultimately are able to make a larger impact than if you were stateside or in Europe. So from my perspective, I had to define impact investing. That would be it. It would be doing good, and also making a profit. And you really can see your the effects of your investment. It's a direct. It feels good. You're helping people that need to be helped, and the region as a whole is a region that needs to come together. My big push, as you mentioned, I've been part of ULI. I chaired the ULI Caribbean Council for 5 years. We need to speak to each other in the Caribbean. We, have all these different island nations and countries. We have the same challenges when it comes to climate, when it comes to poverty, when it comes to education. But often we don't share our information or learn from each other. And that has always been kind of one of my big drivers: is how do we come together as a region? Because when things go bad, we suffer as a region. You can have a hurricane in the southern part of the Caribbean, but travel in the northern part will also get affected, right? So people don't really understand that we're so so geographically different, but we get always put into the same bucket. So in terms of regenerative, now regenerative for me is kind of a new word. I've been hearing it in the last couple of years, and really try to dig deep into kind of what does it mean, right? We started the concept that kind of came and went very quickly was ESG, environmental social governance, and that concept I think was the beginning of our understanding that when you go from resiliency, which is I want to be stronger, I want my project to be stronger, I want my island to be stronger. That's one step, and it's really important, right? I mean, we started in the construction industry, with LEED certifications, which happened 20, 25 years ago, and then we started we started taking that concept and moving into how do we use insulated concrete forms? How do we regenerate water? How do we provide better insulation on our roofs so we can have less use of electricity? How do we create better wind and shadows? And that has now moved into this regenerative concept. And I guess what for me regenerative means, it's kind of like an advanced level of resiliency. It's taking resiliency and bringing it to the next level. And that next level is going deeper and adding more benefits to the land, more benefits to the community, more benefits to the islands. One example is in real estate development, we always look at soil conditions as something that is either good or bad to build with. We look at the rock material. Can we put foundations in the rock material, or does it have organic material that we need to pull out? But it's always with the focus of building on the land. And I think when we look at regenerative now, we start to say, well, maybe the land besides building can add some additional value, right? Maybe the land can produce agriculture and farming. Maybe the land can help us capture some of that water so we don't need to import more water. And it's looking at the land now kind of at a deeper level. So for me, regenerative development is really about going that extra mile so that we can have a better product for both ourselves, whether it's the development and then also the community that surrounds us.
Beautiful, beautiful. Certainly that this definitely has a lot to do with it. And I love that you mentioned the collaboration between the islands and the communication with the Caribbean. I mean, I think that's ultimately that's what we need, what we just need more of in the world, really. It's coming together instead of having differing views. What we look at when we talk about regenerative potential is taking all of these different perspectives, if you will, and even though there's all of these commonalities, there are also all these different perspectives, and how these different perspectives can help you come to what we call a reconciling force. It's like something that actually empowers the whole entire system, the greater whole, if you will, to do something better, to become better. So we're looking at whole systems thinking for regeneration.
What did you call that? What you said?
Whole systems thinking, the greater whole. So you're looking at, so when from the approach that I've been educated with, or that I started in Regenesis Institute, we have the proximate whole and the greater whole. And the project is not the project, the community is the project. And so it's really, these are sort of the terms that we generally use. And here you're talking about the entire Caribbean island, and you may have a project in one island, but how can that island project impact the entire region? And so you're looking at the greater whole in that regard. And for that to happen, there has to be communication. There has to be engagement of all the stakeholders in the islands to see how can this have a positive impact for all of us. And so I think ultimately the world that we're living in today, collaboration is key. I mean, it's really not so much more about competition. It's about how can we come together and actually make it a better world for all of us. So thank you for that. Now, what are the biggest challenges that you have experienced in getting funding for the type of projects that you've worked with that have a positive impact, these impact real estate projects? Tell us a little bit more about, I mean, I'm sure, and I attended one of the webinars recently on specifically on this type of challenges, and I was very happy to listen and learn a lot from that. And I'd love to hear some of those challenges, what they've been for you, and maybe how you've been able to overcome them and getting funding for these projects.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I started purely as a real estate developer and building affordable housings where we'd go to traditional banks to get loans, construction loans. And that worked out really well until kind of the great financial crisis of 2008, where in the location we were at, Puerto Rico, we went from 12 banks down to 4. So a huge, massive loss of liquidity, and development money dried up entirely. And so we went from a very fluid situation of building to almost no building in about a 12-year period. And that was extremely harsh, and it taught me a big lesson that even though we thought we were the top of the food chain as developers, at the end of the day, capital moves everything, and if capital's not there, then nothing else flows. So consequently, we started to move, after we physically moved to Miami, we started to move some of our operations into capital advisory. And, the lessons of the great financial crisis were basically, you got to follow the money, you have to be connected to where the money's at. And at the time, which was about a decade ago, the only, interest on capital that we found for resiliency and sustainable developments was at the highest levels of the banks, mainly in Europe, and some in Asia. So we saw banks, at that level that were interested in resiliency, sustainability. But the money up there never flowed down to the Caribbean or to our region. So it was kind of very intellectual and very nice. I'd go to Amsterdam and speak at conferences in Paris, and we'd all talk about resiliency. But the middle regional banks, the lower level banks, it wasn't on their agenda. The good news is that that's now flowing down. And we're seeing two different sources where it's flowing into. The regional banks, a lot now in the Caribbean, are starting to push the resiliency thinking and attitude. You get international banks like IDB Invest that for years have been championing this, and now communicating with a lot of the regional banks and funding a lot of the regional banks' resiliency projects and funds. So that's kind of the first thing we're seeing, which is very good. And the second thing is we're seeing a lot of alternative management investment groups, right? These are non-traditional banks that have now entered the market, a lot in reaction to what happened from the great financial crisis. A lot was happening because of COVID. And so you get these alternative management groups that have very specific goals. Many have created alternative resiliency funds specifically. One group is Cygnus Financial out of Jamaica and Puerto Rico, and they actually have a $150 million fund they just launched in 2025. So we're seeing this kind of splitting or bifurcation of what traditional banking was with alternative capital, where there is this big focus on resiliency. And what does that mean essentially? It basically means that they want projects that they think are going to survive. And they want to fund projects that have a better chance of, getting past climate crisis situations, that are hardened, that have backup energy, that have water recapture, that have a stronger shell, windows and doors. They're basically, it's kind of this, what we talked about, it's a self-interest. If we're going to invest in a project, we want it to survive, and therefore we help the community in the project and we help ourselves. So, nobody's doing things for free, but the mission and the vision is right. So this concept of impact investing, seeing the financial sector move into it is very, very, it's very exciting because the money is here now, and we don't have to try to sell resiliency and sustainability to these financial groups.
And with regards to so the money's there now, I listened to some interesting observations when I attended your webinar recently as to what specific aspects, what specific criteria, if you will, these funders are looking for. And I think I think it would help the audience actually hear a little bit more about what's needed, because the money's there, but there are certain things that need to happen. Some of I recall that some of the things mentioned where, local teams with local experience, the local connections, and all of this aspects of it. So maybe share a little bit more about once the money is there, what are the challenges, but at the same time, what are the criteria that these types of funders are looking for?
Yeah, so the bottom line is, banks are still looking for what they've always looked for and what they will always look for. They want a safe investment, right? They want to make sure that their downside is covered. A banker will always tell you, we don't make an upside. We don't get a profit. We just have to make sure that what is promised that's going to happen happens. So when they look at resiliency and regenerative development projects, they always will look to the bottom line to make sure that the profit's net operating income is strong and that it's realistic. So the argument usually and should always follow that path when we're talking to banks and saying, look, I am putting in solar, I am putting in water recapture, I am putting in all these other green elements. But what they do is they create more efficiencies on the way we manage. They provide less costs on our energy. They provide more efficient use of our systems, and therefore our returns are stronger. Our net operating income at the bottom of the line is stronger. And that's the argument that banks want to hear. A few years ago, a lot of these investments were 7-10 years that before you get your money back, right? Solar panels is an easy example. You would always pro forma solar panels between 7 and 10 years return. On a lot of projects and islands that we're on today, where electricity cost is upwards of 60 cents a kilowatt hour, we're seeing that return come back in 2 and 3 years, right? So there is no excuse today from a development perspective to be able to not pro forma in those elements, because they get returned really quickly. So it's an easy argument for a bank to say, yes, it's worth investing the extra 7 to 10% in the case of solar, because we know we're going to get it back very quickly. And the bottom line number is going to be higher. And so banks, basically, the way they see it is, if the bottom line number is higher, because of these efficiencies, that ultimately that is going to translate into a better investment, to a higher cap rate, a better cap rate, and so that's the way the banks look at it: is better investments equal better returns.
And so in order to get there and get to that point, and I'm going to kind of share a little bit about what we've been seeing and these conversations that we're having is, in order to get to that point, you have to have a certain level of team to be able to design a project. There has to be certain studies in place, so there has to be pre-development funding in place already for you to be able to hand anything to a bank, a family office, whatever the potential funder is, just looking for equity investors. What's been your experience with pre-development funding, and just, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we're finding in these projects. We have incredible decks. Some of the projects have land ownership, others do not even own the land, but have an incredible vision. Maybe share a little bit with us about how you've been able to overcome those obstacles, or just, advice that you have for the people that would want to go out there and build these type of projects for that pre-development initial stage to kind of break through into being able to attempt to go into the main funders, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, pre-development is the hardest part, right? I think it's when you raise that money, it's very expensive. If you hire consultants like us to help you raise it, it's very expensive. And it's hard because it's usually a small quantity. It's not like the big construction loans at the end where the fees can be justified. So, having said that, I would say that on the pre-development side, some of the errors that I see is that the projects that tend to be, regenerative resiliency first, rather than being, location, infrastructure, business plan, tend to fail, right? So at the end of the day, the project has to have a good location. It has to have a commanding story, its unique selling proposition. It's got to have all those traditional things that make the project successful. And then you can start to tell the story of regenerative development and resiliency. But it can't be the other way around. So I think that I think that a lot of the projects I see tend to be really small. So it's complicated to kind of add value to a small project. And while they're innovative and certainly offer unique elements, it's tough to get funding for, pre-development funding for those, because the numbers are too small. I would say on pre-development, where I've seen success is in multiple small investors that are brought together initially. and that are provided an exit strategy before the finishing of the project. So let me explain. I think that investors today probably feel comfortable with a 2, maybe a 3-year exit strategy. Now that is normally not what if you're in pre-development, you're usually 2 years of permits, entitlements, then another 2 or 3 years of building the project, and then potentially another 1 or 2 years before you sell. So you're looking at these 7 to 10-year timelines in the Caribbean, realistically speaking.
In tradition, and even in traditional development, I mean, when we're looking at a longer term, this is really important what you're touching up on here, because people that don't come from this background generally do not understand the time that it actually takes to do all of this work. You come to it thinking, and you and I have been in the industry for quite a while, so we know, but other people are like, well, this takes a very long time. Well, that's just traditional development itself is difficult, going into regenerative, sustainable. So thank you so much for bringing that up. I think it's really important that people understand that.
Yeah, and in the Caribbean, I always say add 30% to every budget and double the timeline. Just double
there you go.
And I'm usually right. So what happens is that if you want to attract pre-development money, you've got to figure out a story that makes sense to the investor, right? And the investor wants to get out in a couple of years, 3 years, 2 to 3 years. So how do you structure your deal so that the investor can come in and take that pre-development risk with you and define what that is, and then allow him or her to be able to exit if that's what they want to do, or stay in the transaction, but provide a time benchmark. So what often is what I've seen that works very well is that when you are in pre-development and you have a value-added play on the permits or the entitlements, where you take a land and you're going to have architects and engineers design the project, and you're going to go to the governments and get it rezoned or upzoned or whatnot. Usually that 2 to 3 year period is a point where you can take out your investors after you've achieved that milestone. And so by offering that, investors go, okay, I have some choices. When the project is able to get its better zoning and improved, design, I can be taken out when the construction loan happens, or if the project is able to be sold, to a third party at a higher value, I'm able to be taken out. So 2 different exit strategies for the same pre-development money. And that works really well because an investor says, okay, if I want to stay in on the project 3 years from now, I'll get bumped up to an additional return class. If the developer is not able to get construction, but the property has been improved, it's got a higher value, it appraises more, I can get taken out with the sale of the asset. So I would say that that's really smart. It's just a way to, keep the timeline short, set up those milestones, and allow those initial investors an opportunity to, stay with you for the time that they feel comfortable.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I'm going to actually go into a different question that I haven't asked into in other interviews, but because I know that this is something that you're also diving into. There's a lot of movement in the regenerative development space and what we're calling regenerative finance. And so it's basically blockchain and projects. And how do you see that impact real estate, regenerative real estate? What's the movement with Web3 and technology right now? I know that's something that you're also passionate about. So I was curious to learn more as well.
Yeah, and if I don't have the time, I talk about it in my book, Why Puerto Rico Now. I do spend multiple chapters on this subject. I definitely love it.
Beautiful.
I think that the concept of reward those that contribute is really what the new Web3 is about, right? Reward those that contribute. And so, today with AI specifically, we're able to crunch so much more information and data than we were before. We were, as developers, it would normally take us 6 to 8 months just to do an initial feasibility analysis of a site. And today, with a lot of the technology that's out there, that can happen in minutes. We're able to, figure out data that have to go to architects and engineers, and they would have to do studies, and then they'd have to revise the studies and then come back. And now we can just figure that out really fast. So it allows us within a very short period of time to progress much further and faster. And that allows us to go deeper. right? So the idea is not that this becomes onerous, that now we want to know what the soil's conditions can do to raise plants and where the wind is coming from and where it's not something that's extra work. It's actually easier to get. So having
Mhm.
more data and having this big data provides us a new basis of analysis, a deeper basis of analysis. And my thinking has always been that when we can take the process and first of all make it clearer, right? When we can take our information, our documentation, and we can put it out there in a secure manner, and that information can be accessed by multiple parties throughout this whole development process, right? Which could take years, and even after you deliver, it's decades and decades and decades. So having that information be secure, and having that information being communicated to all the parties is really a huge first step.
Mhm.
And then I think the second part that's really important is how do we provide new revenue streams, right? So we have environmental crisis. It's
Mhm.
bad. It's costing us more. We're having to figure out that we got to pay for it. If we keep looking to the same sources of revenue to pay for new costs, it's always going to be a negative transaction, right? Because if you only have $100 and now you had $110 of costs, and then it becomes $120 of costs, 130, but you only have the same 100. It's just you're losing. You're never going to make it up. You're never going to take care of yourself. You're never going to be resilient. So we need to find new revenue streams. And I think that what we're seeing today in the real estate development space is the ability to take, for example, data, bring that data together, and then take that data and be able to generate new revenues from that data. And I always say it's kind of like in the old days, you would have an office building and you put a billboard on it, and that billboard didn't exist before. And now it's new revenues for you. And then it became the cellular tower. And now you have new revenues on the same building. And now it's data. So a lot of developers, I think, in the future are going to have this new revenue stream that didn't exist in their pro formas. And it's going to be the acquisition, the bringing together, and then eventually the selling of data, which is going to generate the money that they need to make more resilient and regenerative development. So, and that seems to be where we're headed. And I'm very excited about how blockchain is going to allow us and facilitate us to do that.
Do you see any, are you working or seeing anything in it relates to selling real estate and tokenized assets and, projects that accept crypto and that sort of, or that are being funded with crypto even, because, we're aware of a couple of projects and that we are engaged with in the built environment that have actually been funded by crypto investors.
Well, the big project that happened, actually it's now 3 years ago, was the Four Seasons Hotel that ended up
Okay,
raising, $10 million, well, tokenized money. And
there you go.
that was really the beginning of the process. And yes, it was an existing hotel that wanted to refinance for some capital improvements, and it did both traditional refinance, but it also did tokenized refinance, and it worked really well. So,
Beautiful.
having the capacity to, generate tokens for your project is innovative. It's still not there. But, we are today talking, April 15th, tax day, 2025. Anybody who's been following the news for the last 2 or 3 weeks has seen that the world is moving very quickly. It's changing.
Mhm.
Everything that's happening with tariffs is moving the world, what it seems like, away from traditional finance, the dollar, et cetera, into new spaces. So we don't know where this is going to go, but it's definitely being exacerbated by the politics of today. And if you ask me what the next couple of years is going to look like, it's definitely going to be more non-traditional than traditional from a finance perspective.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, that's wonderful news for all of us working in the space and pushing and catalyzing that. And so, I'll have it one last question, and then anything else you'd like to share to add. So, name your top three successfully funded projects, like projects that you believe have had a positive impact in the community, in the environment, out of the ones that you've been engaging with, and or maybe others that top three, and why do you believe they were successful?
So, from an affordable housing perspective, there's Rural development. We funded over the years a handful of different projects with rural development funding, and that's federal U.S. funding for projects in Puerto Rico.
Okay.
The ability to leverage federal U.S. funding and be able to do it for a good cause, right? Affordable housing, senior housing. It's just, it always makes sense.
Needed.
It's a
We need it.
revenue that is consistent. It's you know, a lot of paperwork and a lot of due diligence that's required to get it to the finish line. But once you succeed, you have this asset that's going to be financed for the next 30 years. And so I think that, you know, from a impact investing perspective, I would definitely give a thumbs up to our affordable housing projects that we've done over the years using federal U.S. financing. The
Okay.
second project we just financed recently, and this was a project in Jamaica, which is a workforce housing project in Jamaica. And
Okay.
this was a you know, $10 million construction loan that we recently got across the finish line with a Jamaican bank, alternative management company. And this was Cygnus Financial. And I think that what's really unique about this project is that a lot of the buyers for this workforce housing project come from both Jamaica, but are also come from the diaspora. And what's really important when we look at the Caribbean and we think about our Caribbean projects is that we're not just our island's population, but we're a
100%.
diaspora that lives all across the world. And in the case of Jamaica, really a large chunk of those are from, they live in London, they live in New York, they live in Miami. And so the Jamaican community coming back home and being able to afford the homes, you know, it's really a special thing. And so I think that when we look at alternative capital, it might initially seem more expensive than traditional banks. However, when you think of the flexibility that these groups provide and the speed in which they can close and the type of investments they can make, both on debt and equity, it's really an attractive thing. And so I guess my third project would be a St. Maarten hotel and resort. And,
Beautiful. I'm beautiful Sint Maarten.
we love St. Maarten,
We
and
love Sint
we
Maarten.
were, you know, very excited to be able to bring together, you know, three very different forces from across the world: investment from South Africa, developers from Toronto, Canada, and
Let
landowners
me guess. Is
and,
that Indigo?
and Indigo Bay.
Indigo Bay.
And so, you know, while not as obviously meaningful from an affordable housing or a workforce housing perspective, it is taking an island that has really had a big demand and a need for a luxury product, and it's kind of taking the shape of the island and bringing it back to where it used to be. St. Maarten used to be a very luxury focused island, and then got lost.
Recall
You know, in the
after the
70s and
hurricane,
80s, it went somewhere else, and it's now
and then
coming
also,
back again.
and also then after the hurricane, after it was shot, I mean, that was a huge hit in St. Maarten. I remember when I was working there in 2014, and everything that happened afterwards. And then it's interesting, you know, the indigo process, if you will, because it's been many years also in that project as well. Wonderful. Well, good to know, and thank you so much for sharing all of that. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us before we close out? And then anybody else that you think we should be talking and having this conversation? Just any suggestions of who we might reach out to, and just last words that you'd like to leave with us.
So yeah, so I guess in terms of you know, where we are today, and for those that are interested in making a change, to impacting, to helping, you know, stay strong, be patient, and realize that we are, you know, the tide is moving in this direction. So it is a lot easier today to raise capital for impact investing than it was a decade ago. It's going to get easier as we keep moving forward. And when you know, are ready to go to the marketplace, you know, understand, especially in the Caribbean, that it's the 80-20 rule. You know, the Pareto rule, where, you know, you'll talk to 10 people and 8 just because you're in that region of the world are not interested or don't understand it.
Hmm.
But there is a group, that 20% that does want to help in the region, that does want to work there. And there's a bunch of different conferences and events, like you had mentioned, ULI, the Alice Cala event that's coming up at the end of the month in Miami, Chico's and the Barbados that happens at some island in the Caribbean. So there are places to get together with like-minded people. And I would just say stay focused and keep up the good work.
Wonderful, wonderful. And anyone else? Anyone suggestions as to
Well,
who
I
they?
would always, on the capital side, I think that Rogerio Basso, for me, is
Okay,
one of the great leaders of this.
YDB.
And they walk the walk. I mean, they invest in projects and funds that are resilient and regenerative. And I would say that he would be a great person to speak with.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Well, Adam, it's been wonderful having you. It's been a very, very informative and insightful conversation. And grateful for all the work that you're doing again. And I look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully soon, before hopping back out of the country again. And yeah, thank you again, and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day. Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you.